What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
Oh, Rob Core. Oof, man. I've been getting a lot of messages. Why you no make the videos, Rob? I am sick, but the Rob Core waits for no man. So bear with me in this video. I'm not going to be as lively as I normally am just because of the fact that I'm kind of recovering from a cold, but I have to make videos. No YouTube videos means no YouTube money, and no YouTube money means no Netflix, and no Netflix means no Black Mirror, and it means no Menace to Society. I've been watching that movie lately. So we are covering Wonder Woman Year 1. Now, this is kind of a big deal in the realm of DC Comics. And the reason why is because of the fact that with the New 52, Brian Azzarello had basically taken over the Wonder Woman landscape. And he did an amazing job. I mean, I loved Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman, and a lot of people did. I mean, in the eyes of a lot of fans, Azzarello really kind of reinvigorated and made Wonder Woman like this solid character. The issue was that Azzarello was writing the stories in a way where it was really like he was aiming more to kind of etch his name in the list of writers who have made like timeless stories regarding characters, as opposed to tying her into the New 52 mythos. And so the result was that you could go pick up Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman and encounter an entirely different version of Diana Prince than what you would see in Jeff Johns' Justice League. And so it threw people off a little bit. It really kind of caused a bit of confusion, but the good thing was that you could read Azzarello's run by itself and it would be fine. What Greg Rucka is doing here is basically starting from zero. He's more or less reinvigorating the entire landscape of Wonder Woman, and it makes sense. If Azzarello had sat down and Azzarello had taken the approach that he was going to basically remove Wonder Woman from the rest of the New 52 in terms of her personality, it would make sense that Greg Rucka and the rest of DC would come back and say, okay, we need to restore her back so that people can kind of jump back and forth between the titles and not feel thrown off. And so what Greg Rucka did here is with Year 1, he again took this in segments, and that seems to be the ongoing thing in the sense that, you know, Wonder Woman issue number 1 was The Lies Part 1, and then issue number 2 was Year 1 Part 1, and it was kind of going back and forth, you know, this give and take. So really Year 1 was like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, something like that, and that seems to be the ongoing theme he's shooting for. But the fact remains is that this is effectively the origin of Wonder Woman, this brand new origin for her character, and it's actually really cool here. And the reason why is because Greg Rucka is extremely good when it comes to looking at like the narrative of characters, looking at like individual characters and emphasizing them on a very fundamental level. He did a great job with it with regards to really to like, you know, some of the Star Wars lines. I want to say Shattered Empire. He did a great job with it on Wolverine, and he's doing a great job with it here when it comes to Wonder Woman. The idea though is that what he does is he takes this notion of Themyscira as we would perceive it and kind of asks us a few questions. The first being, if we're talking about an island only with women and that people by their very definition desire companionship, it stands to reason that the women on Themyscira would find companionship with each other. What we would consider to be I guess an alternate style of living, that's what you want to call it, they would consider to be the norm. And the cool thing about this is that it's all a matter of perspective. It's really just a matter of how people function within any given ecosystem. And that's the cool thing about Themyscira, is because remember, this is an isolated territory, and that's one of the things that Greg Rucka focuses on a lot when it comes to Wonder Woman, is the isolationist standard of Themyscira. But he also doesn't leave out a lot of the things with regards to Wonder Woman herself, you know, Diana Prince, in terms of her place, where she's from, that kind of thing. But what he also does is he kind of bounces back and forth between Steve Trevor and Diana Prince. So the cool thing about this is he basically juxtaposes the two against one another in the sense that they're both basically trained fighters. That's really what they are. You know, Steve Trevor is military. Diana Prince is the daughter of a queen. They're both trained to use weapons. They're both trained to fight. They're both trained to hold their own. And that's cool because what this does is it allows, or it will allow, Greg Rucka to kind of segue into a relationship between the two without it feeling forced. And that's one of the things that people really, really dig when it comes to the idea of relationships, especially in the realm of comic books, is forcing two characters together doesn't make any sense. Pairing characters together works out well. Aurora Monroe, you know, Storm and Black Panther works out well. Storm's considered to be Mother Nature, so to speak. For a lot of people who live within the greater African territory, Black Panther is the king and really kind of like the god priest of the citizens of Wakanda. You know, when it comes to Cyclops and Jean Grey, you know, the fact that they were both students together, they trained together, that kind of thing, it was a natural progression. A lot of those situations just work. Clark Kent, Lois Lane, you know, Spider-Man, Mary Jane Watson, it just kind of comes together on its own. And that's the cool thing about this, is it's sort of this ongoing theme of basically kind of blending these two characters together. Now, in terms of the story going in the direction of the two of them encountering one another, this really comes to a head with the mission regarding Steve Trevor and his friend Nick. Now, we don't know exactly what the specifics of this mission are, but what we do know is that for Nick, he's basically a new father. He's a guy who's essentially leaving his wife and his child behind to go on a mission. And that's the cool thing about this, is because in this one little segment here, Greg Rucka does not provide us with any text, but the way the characters are drawn tells us everything. We could look at this and we could say, here's a father and a husband going on a mission, and he doesn't know if he'll come back. He's basically pondering the idea that he may leave his child, without a father, and leave his wife without a husband. And so it's really kind of cool the way these things come together. But the fact remains that, when they're transversing or, traveling to wherever it is that they're going, they basically crash onto the shores of Themyscira. Now, the cool thing about this is that Themyscira is supposed to be a place that's undiscovered. It's supposed to be a place that no one should be able to find. That's one of the cool things about it, is that Themyscira is a place that cannot be found except by those who already know where it is. And so the idea, I guess, to kind of steal the line from Pirates of the Caribbean, I love that movie, but the idea is that Greg Rucka kind of bounces back and forth, and that's one of the things that he was really emphasizing. When it came to Wonder Woman: The Lies, it was basically this idea that, as we had talked about in that video, Wonder Woman had never been home to Themyscira. She had never been back. From the time she left, which is really what kind of was happening here, from the time she left here up until the time that she thought that she had gone back, she'd never actually been there. Now, we don't know why it is that she had seen Hippolyta. We don't know why it is she'd seen other members of the Amazons. We don't know if somebody was messing with her mind. We don't know if it was an illusion. We don't know what the deal was. All we know is that she left and she had never been back since. And so what ended up happening here is that with regards to Steve Trevor and his, I guess really being the only survivor, of course he's taken in, by the Amazons and intended to, but it's also this idea that Hippolyta, along with her, really General Philippus, I think is how you pronounce it, the head of the military, they're basically sitting down and analyzing things. And this is why I say I love the way that Greg Rucka does this, is because they come across guns. Now, the Amazons have never seen guns. They've never heard of guns. They don't know what guns are. For them, their weapons are still primitive. And that's the cool thing about this, is they're powerful. They're very strong in terms of what they're able to do as far as, their comparison to average people. I mean, Wonder Woman is an exception, and we'll find out why. But the fact remains that bows, arrows, spears, swords, shields, face-to-face, hand-to-hand combat is their way of life. To come across somebody who can shoot a projectile from a weapon from, however far away without ever actually looking at their enemy in the eye presents a very dangerous situation, because what it means to the Amazons is that somebody could storm their island and take this out, take them all out. In addition, when they see it being when they see it being shot, it's just like, wow, this is insane. But the other thing that they have to bear in mind here, or at least the one thing that Hippolyta says, is that Steve Trevor accessed the island presumably because the gods allowed him to. Now, we don't know if that's an absolute certainty. That seems to be what Greg Rucka's hinting at. But the idea here seems to be that if Themyscira was a place that actually existed in the world that anybody could access, well, then it would have already been discovered. It would have been discovered by satellite. Somebody would have charted it. Someone somewhere along the line would have asked a question, what's that island there and why are there people on it? And then they would have explored it. But the fact that that never happened before lends genuine credence to the idea that the only people who can find Themyscira are individuals who are allowed to find it by the Greek gods themselves. And so that means that if Steve Trevor showed up here on the island, then the gods allowed it, and they made it that way. And so from the idea of Hippolyta, Steve Trevor's here with the permission of the gods, which means the gods have a purpose for them to carry out. Now, this is where Greg Rucka kind of starts to get into the realm of faith when it comes to the Wonder Woman mythos. And that's one of the things that I really like about this. Wonder Woman is unique in terms of where she stands with regards to the rest of the DC landscape, because she invokes Greek gods. If we took somebody like Shazam, for example, the Rock of Eternities, so on and so forth, he derives his powers, if I remember correctly, he derives his powers from like the heads of all the different god groups, from around the landscape of DC. Not all of them, but a bunch of them. But the idea is that with Wonder Woman, she's tied more to the Greek gods themselves as we know them. But nobody else in DC is really like that when it comes to like the major players. Cyborg doesn't worship Greek gods, doesn't really worship any gods. Superman doesn't really worship any gods. Batman, so on and so forth. Wonder Woman's very unique in this. And the idea is that the gods do not routinely show up. It's not like Zeus says, hey, Wonder Woman, here is why Steve Trevor's here, just so you know. Instead, they just kind of have to infer why it is that Steve Trevor's here, kind of watch events as they unfold and then come to conclusions naturally. It's very Judeo-Christian-like. It's very, religious-like in the sense that there's no definitive answers. It's just observing the landscape, trying to get a lay of the terrain, and then just going forward based on faith. And it works out here because what this does is it brings Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor together. Of course, Wonder Woman being curious about Steve being curious about Wonder Woman, but there's a language barrier. Of course, Wonder Woman's basically speaking Greek as far as we're aware. Steve Trevor speaks English, and so this language barrier makes it difficult. But in their attempts to understand understand one another, it creates some measure of a bond in the sense that they're trying to learn more about each other. You know, it's almost as if you were trying to create a kinship with a picture that you saw somewhere, and you just spent hours staring at it. After a while, that picture will become a part of you. Like, you'll just kind of think about it more than you would any other picture that you've seen, because you focus more on that. It's kind of an intrinsic part of who you are, self-understanding, whatever it is, you know, existential crises or something along those lines. But the fact remains here that, again, it's really just kind of setting the landscape. The problem with this is that the question Hippolyta and the rest of the Amazons have is, why is Steve Trevor here? If Steve Trevor, this man was sent to Themyscira by the gods, he's going to have to return home. And if he was brought here by the gods, it means that someone needs to follow him back home. But this is also a little bit of a reconnaissance mission. It's the idea that Hippolyta basically wants to have some measure of understanding about what's going on. The problem with this is that, as a rule, when a person leaves Themyscira, they can never come back. They can never return. And so this is when Greg Rucka starts to get into these murky waters, because this is when we have to ask the question, if a person leaves Themyscira and they can never come back, then where did Wonder Woman go whenever she went back to Themyscira? Who was she talking to? Who were those people that she was associating with? That's the question that we really kind of have to ask here, because at the moment, we don't know. And so what ends up happening is a contest is held. They usually have these sort of tournament games, these gladiatorial games, and they're usually held for, you know, a ceremonial status, you know, to kind of break away the weak from the strong, and so on and so forth. But the games are being moved up, and the reason why is because the person who wins the games will be the one to accompany Steve Trevor. Now, the cool thing about what Greg Rucka does here is that we as the reader would look at this and say, well, okay, if they're going to have a gladiatorial game, Wonder Woman's going to win. He doesn't play coy with that. You know, when it comes to the comics, with the way he writes it, everybody knows that Wonder Woman's going to win. You know, Wonder Woman's mom knows that she's going to win because she's the greatest warrior of them. She's the daughter of a queen. She's been trained to fight since the day that she was born. The other half of this is that within the realm of Themyscira, Wonder Woman is the only person who was actually born, quote unquote, on the island. Everybody else was just there. You know, they were just kind of a branch off from ancient Greek society, and they've just been there ever since. You know, it was just, they were there one day. With Wonder Woman, she was effectively born into this realm. And so because of this, it creates this cool situation, because it's Greg Rucka saying, look, I'm not going to treat you guys like you're dumb. You know, you guys know Wonder Woman's going to win, so let's just write the story so that everybody knows that she's going to win. And that's cool, because Hippolyta sits down and talks to her daughter and says, look, if you want to sit this out, that's fine. No one will fault you for doing that. But Wonder Woman says, I would fault myself. I would consider myself to be weak. And this is basically the two of them coming to the realization, or really coming to the understanding, that if Wonder Woman competes, she will win. And as the winner, she will accompany Steve Trevor, she will leave Themyscira, and she will never be allowed to come back. And that's exactly what happens. Now, with regards to these trials that they undergo, it's really just kind of like a trial, you know, like a giant fight, so to speak, kind of like this battle royale. And all that does is thin the herd really fast. It's actually a really efficient way to pull it off. But as the final test, what ends up happening is Hippolyta grabs really one of the guns, or the gun of Steve Trevor, and says, I'm going to fire a shot at each of you, and I want you to parry the shot. One of them misses entirely. The second one parries one bullet. Wonder Woman parries them all. But the cool thing is that Greg Rucka doesn't show us that, because we don't need to see that. We don't need to see Wonder Woman, you know, successfully fending off against, you know, the bullets of Steve Trevor, because we know she's going to be the one to win. And so it's just like, it's cool. He doesn't really waste our time with something like that. And that's one of the reasons why I love Greg Rucka's storytelling so much. But the other half of this is Wonder Woman basically donning her ceremonial garb. And the reason why she's wearing this outfit, and the reason why I think this is so cool, is because this isn't just like a costume that she put on one day. It wasn't like one day she was walking through a store and said, you know what, I want to wear that. I think that would be a great costume for a superhero. This is ceremonial. This is intrinsic to her. It is basically, it's the Wonder Woman equivalent of Superman's costume, the clothes that Superman wears, the cape that he has. That is an intrinsic part of who he is. It's a fundamental aspect of his character. You know, the Superman insignia is more recognizable than the Christian cross. When it comes to Wonder Woman, this outfit is instantly recognizable. It doesn't matter who was wearing it. If you saw anybody wearing this, you would immediately think Wonder Woman. You wouldn't think anybody else. And that's one of the cool things about this, is because it's this idea that Greg Rucka is giving us, saying, hey, look, this is how it all begins to sort of come together. This is how it all, you know, creates this very cohesive scene. Now, from here, it's really just kind of Wonder Woman receiving a lot of the different aspects of her role, you know, as to say, you know, her I guess, bracelets, you know, and her lasso of truth, and so on and so forth. But in terms of who she is right now, with regards to, you know, being equivalent to Superman, that does not come until a little bit later. For right now, she's still very much human. in terms of her durability, strength, so on and so forth. She's not exceptional. But the cool thing is that they managed to be able to make the ship, or make the plane invisible after they fixed it. So it was really just kind of Greg Rucka paying this homage to, Wonder Woman's invisible jet. But of course, once they arrive, what this does is it basically kind of sends things into a tailspin, with Steve Trevor presumed dead, and then suddenly showing up on an invisible plane with some woman that no one knows anything about. It's really kind of this scenario where Wonder Woman is experiencing the world of men. And the way this is done from our eyes is normal. The way it's done from her perspective is not. With Themyscira, if you belong on the island, there's no borders there. You can go virtually anywhere you want to on the island. You can't leave, but you can go anywhere you want to on the island. You're basically a completely free citizen. Within this realm that she comes into, really the rest of the world of men, as soon as she arrives, they don't know who she is. She has no identification. They effectively take her prisoner. They, force her into a fingerprint identification system, and then just kind of keep her detained in a prison cell. Now, they don't do it out of malice. So it's not like, you're an evil person, we're just going to lock you away. They don't do that, but it's really just kind of taking precautions. It's safety. But at the same time, if you were not from Themyscira and you showed up on the island, you would get the exact same treatment. And so it's really kind of interesting to see, these two dichotomies really kind of comparing themselves to one another. But at this point, what we end up doing is we actually end up picking up with Barbara Ann Minerva. Now, Barbara Ann Minerva is basically the woman who would go on to become Cheetah. And the cool thing is that there is a one-shot in Greg Rucka's line of stories that tells us what happens with regards to her becoming Cheetah. But the issue is that in the middle of Wonder Woman being, really kind of going through and being held in the cell, she's suddenly visited by really the gods of Olympus that show up in different forms, show up, with Aphrodite being the goddess of beauty, shows up as a peacock, so on and so forth. Each god represents a different facet of what their stance is in the realm of Olympus. But when Barbara Ann Minerva shows up alongside Steve Trevor and Etta, what ends up happening here is Barbara Ann is able to basically speak to Wonder Woman. She's able to speak her language. The issue is that Wonder Woman starts babbling on about nonsense in the eyes of Barbara Ann Minerva. Wonder Woman is just like, yeah, man, like the Greek gods showed up and they came as animals and they gave me powers. And so like the initial thought of everybody watching this is just like, this chick's crazy. Like Wonder Woman's on bath salts. Like this chick is going nuts, and it's kind of funny because that's what we would think, right? I mean, somebody that we've never seen before shows up wearing a pretty strange costume and starts babbling on about how the gods showed up in the form of animals and gave her powers. We would think she's high on something. But the cool thing about this though is that they also bring in the element of Superman. They're like, hey, look, yeah, we would have said that was crazy, but there's an alien that's flying around the city of Metropolis with strength that virtually no one can rival. It's really not that far out of the realm of possibility that this person is speaking the truth. The issue here is that it really comes down to like the idea of religion. Wonder Woman's talking about gods. You can't verify gods. They can test the genes of Superman and tell that he's not human. He does not have a human physiology. He has an alien physiology. That's a testable thing, a provable thing. You can go to any scientist on the planet and verify that. You can't verify the ravings of Wonder Woman who claims the Greek gods showed up and gave her powers. But then what she does is basically just rip the cell off, rip the cell apart, and then shows that she has super strength now. So that's pretty much answering their question. And I really like the way that happens because it's kind of like everybody's trying to figure out if she's telling the truth or not. And Greg Rucka, it's almost like he was writing this, was like, you know what, let's just give him the easiest answer ever. Let's just have her just tear things up. Let's have her just use her super strength. Now, at this point, what this does is it transitions over to the idea of what to do with Wonder Woman because she's extremely strong. She's extremely powerful. It doesn't mean that the military intends to use her for their own purposes. What it does mean is they want to get an understanding of what she's about. Not only that, for Steve Trevor, Steve says, look, she's here to help us. She's here to help us take out this rogue group that we were supposed to go against. This, I think it was the Seers or whatever it was. She's here to help us deal with this problem. And so what ends up happening is they say, look, we need to take her out into the world. If she's going to help us solve an issue, then she needs to understand the concepts, or at least be able to understand our concept of right and wrong. She needs to understand what we consider to be evil, what we consider to be good, that kind of thing. And it really works out beautiful that way because it's all about a matter of perspective. It's all about what place that you're coming from. A really good example is if I took a newborn baby and I raised that baby in a world of survival of the fittest, where it was basically taught from birth, do whatever you need to do to survive. Steal, kill, whatever, do what you need to do. That baby would grow into a person who would do that. Well, then if I then suddenly turn around and took that baby or took that person and introduced it into organized society, well, they would think nothing of walking into a store and just taking food and then just walking out with it, because for them, that's just what they do. But in the realm of an organized and structured society, that's not how it works. And the issue here is that Steve Trevor did not have full-on exposure to the overall structure of Themyscira. He had an idea of how they function, but he would never be allowed to engage in the inner workings of Themyscira itself. You know, he's a passing fancy, he's an interest at the time, and then he was dismissed just as quickly as he was captured. And so the idea is for Steve Trevor, for Etta, for Barbara to basically sit down and say, we have to teach Wonder Woman what our world is like, not necessarily to convert her to our views, but to help her serve her purpose of making the world a better place. And so the cool thing is that she starts, like, they kind of go on like this little tangent, right? They're like, hey man, we got to get her like churros, you know, and we need to take her to a movie, you know, we have to expose her to all these cool things. It was almost like that throwback when she had ice cream for the first time and was like, this ice cream is amazing. Like it was a really cool moment in her character's history. But again, in the middle of this whole, you know, experience where she reveals to them that by touching the lasso of truth, they can understand her language, the group is suddenly attacked by this terrorist cell. Now, of course, Wonder Woman is able to face off against every last one of these guys. And of course, in the digital age, all of it's captured on camera. It's captured on cell phones and so on and so forth. But what we end up finding out is that this very group that's here, these individuals who, you know, showed up to attack is basically the Seer group. It's this rebel faction that exists within the realm of DC that Steve Trevor was trying to take out in the first place. And so what this does is it creates somewhat of a temporary gathering, so to speak, between Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman. And so they now have a mutual enemy. And so it allows things to kind of go forward. But the other half of this is that everybody's asking questions now. People are like, who is this person Wonder Woman, who basically has all the powers of Superman? And somebody even refers to her as Superwoman. Now, of course, Wonder Woman doesn't have heat vision, different things like that. She doesn't have frost breath, you know, but in terms of strength, speed, durability, you know, the power of flight, she's right up there with Superman. With her warrior prowess, she's a better fighter than Superman. And so if it really came down to it, I would say she could probably take the Man of Steel out. But with regards to people who were just here in this immediate vicinity, the question is, who is this person? Is she friend or is she foe? And so what happens is Barbara basically says, this needs to be a PR campaign. That's basically what this is. We're going to be the public relations face of Wonder Woman. We're going to teach her everything she needs to know. We're going to test her powers. We're going to see what she's capable of. And so essentially, she's received all the powers of the gods, you know, flight, strength, super speed, all that kind of stuff. But it's cool because this basically tells us how she got to where she was. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that it's not as though Wonder Woman is new to the world. She's not an infant. She's not a newborn. It's not like, you know, she's Bizarro. It's not like she was just created and she's just now learning everything. She's learning everything about this world. Not only that, she has powers now for the very first time. And so she's learning about those powers as well. And so it's really kind of a growing thing for her. And that's one of the things that I hope you guys notice about this is that in this story, Wonder Woman seems very, you know, very wide-eyed. You know, she seems very green around the ear. She's very, very new to what it means to be a part of the normal human world. But then if you go and you read the lies, she's so much stronger now. She's really kind of like this valuable character really to the DC landscape. And what this is designed to represent is the coming of age. That's really what it is. And that's the cool thing about Wonder Woman. That's one of the things that I love about her so much. Again, you know, kind of transitioning through this and you know, kind of encountering Steve Trevor and so on and so forth. The cool thing about Wonder Woman is a lot of people will look at her and they will say, well, Wonder Woman represents feminism and things like that. In a lot of ways she does. But Wonder Woman is a reflection of the traditional superhero landscape. Batman, Superman, so on and so forth. But for Wonder Woman, it's different because Wonder Woman is a human, or I guess really it's as close as she can get to a human, who's encountering humanity for the very first time. She's not like Superman, where she's of an alien origin and was just kind of arrived on Earth one day or something like that. You know, Wonder Woman was born here. She lives here. This is her home, but she never knew it was her home. She never knew anything about it. This is the coming of age. This is those of us who are going out and experiencing school for the first time, making friends for the first time, falling in love, falling out of love, you know, learning how to drive, all those experiences that make us feel more cohesive, that make us feel more attached to the world that we live in. Wonder Woman is a reflection of that. And that's why she's part of the Trinity. I mean, sure, she is a character that young women everywhere can look up to. But in terms of her longevity, in terms of why she stood the test of time as really one of the most important superheroes ever created, is the role that she plays in the lives of young girls, as well as the fact that she ties into the coming of age concept of superheroes. Superman's the same way, you know, in a different form. Batman's the same way in a different form. Each of them has their own way of kind of tying into the coming of age tale. And so the idea here is that Wonder Woman's more or less sitting down with these members of the Seer group who are captured. Wonder Woman says, look, my lasso of truth will force them to tell the truth if they're ensnared. And once she, of course, puts the lasso around them, all they begin doing is just kind of babbling about, you know, terror and panic and fear and so on and so forth. And this is when we learned that the entire goal of the Seer group was to basically create a contagion. The contagion was going to be spread throughout the world and literally send the planet into a state of absolute madness. And so the goal of Steve Trevor was to find where this lab was cooking this, you know, this contagion up, you know, take a sample, destroy the lab, bring the sample back that would allow them to basically go through to and create a cure so that if the seer group were to actually, be successful in carrying out their campaign, there'd be an immediate response to it and the world wouldn't descend into absolute madness. The problem with this is that Steve Trevor crash landed on Themyscira. And so it really set the plans behind in terms of what ended up happening here. And so what we end up doing is we follow up with Barbara Minerva. And this is where things get really cool because for the most part, the idea of the seer group is interesting because what it would have done is it would have allowed Greg Rucka to kind of introduce some fresh blood into the DC landscape, right? Like it would have allowed him to introduce, a new group that we had never seen or heard of before. But Rebirth is not about creating something new. Rebirth is about returning to familiarity. And that's what this story is. The whole goal with Seer is that Seer is I think it's an anagram where you switch the letters around. Seer is not what this group represents. It's not who they're working for. What they're working for is Ares. Ares, of course, being the god of war. And this is kind of a cool thing here is because Wonder Woman says, you do not want to mess with him. His is a way of war, a way of conflict, a way of death and destruction. Where men fight, Ares is there. But the cool thing about this is keep in mind, from the perspective of Barbara, Etta, Steve Trevor, humanity as a whole, Greek gods are myths. They're things that don't exist. They are concepts that were used to explain, situations that people couldn't explain at the time. Individuals didn't understand why crops grew when it rained and they didn't grow when it didn't rain. People didn't understand why it is that crops grow with sunlight. People don't understand these things. So they say, well, the gods make it happen. What Wonder Woman does is she comes back and says, no, those were the gods. I mean, there were other things going on too. Like, sure, the fertility of the land is what allowed things to grow, but the gods do exist. And, Ares is not some metaphor that was used by a primitive group of people to explain why it is that men fight against one another. Ares is a god of war, and wherever war is to be found, he will be found perpetuating that war. And so really it's kind of cool here because it's basically Wonder Woman fighting the god of war. And it's so cool to see this is because, again, it's this constant idea that the claims of Wonder Woman are legitimate. The Greek gods are very much real. The Greek gods are very much, here to play a role in the lives of humans, only insofar as they may or may not, depending on what it is that they want to do. But with the idea of Ares being here in terms of the Wonder Woman mythos, the Wonder Woman landscape, this is effectively Greg Rucka setting in stone, solidifying the idea that she can never go back and explaining why. The reason for this is because Wonder Woman doesn't approach Ares as a warrior. The reason being because if she did, she would probably lose. I mean, just in terms of the fact that she's so new to her abilities, it's not fully fleshed out. Now, if we're talking about Wonder Woman right now, instead of this origin story, she would crush the god of war. But with regards to this origin with, her kind of where she's at and kind of figuring things out, and she doesn't think that she can because in her mind, she still looks at the gods as people who are way above them as opposed to her being somebody equal to them. And so because of this, she really kind of supplicates herself, right? She sits down and she says, show mercy on these people, show mercy on humanity, and Ares says, okay, fine, I will show mercy to Steve Trevor. I will spare his life. I won't kill him, but I want something in return. And this was always the goal of Ares. This was really always his goal. Ares is a master manipulator. I mean, he's super good at this. And his goal was to basically get back to Themyscira, was to say, I want to find the women on Themyscira. I want to go back and visit them again. Well, the problem is that when Wonder Woman says, then touch my mind and find the location of Themyscira, when Ares goes to do that, he can't find it. And the reason why is because Wonder Woman doesn't know where it is. And that's the issue, is that the location of Themyscira has been stripped from her mind. She has no idea how to get back. Even if she wanted to go back, she can't. It's almost as if the trail of breadcrumbs has just been wiped away. She's walking lost in a forest and has no idea how to get back to the starting point. And that's the cool thing is because Greg Rucka makes it that simple. I mean, he could have made it super difficult, right? He could have made it like this stupid, huge, long, drawn out thing where it was just this huge explanation and it was this great, big, huge battle and she died and then she came back to life and coming back to life, she can never go back to Themyscira. No. He keeps it clean and simple. And that's the best way to do it. She can't go back to Themyscira because the location of Themyscira has been wiped from her mind. She can never go back. She doesn't know where it is. She has no idea how to go back. And so from there, it's really just kind of her facing off against, against Ares and really holding her own. And that's the coolest thing here is because, again, Ares is a god of war. So technically speaking, he's kind of immortal, at least it seems to be that way. She more or less takes him out, like defeats him, but he's not really dead per se, so much as just like defeated, or at least that seems to be the case. Now, whether Greg Rucka will bring Ares back or not has yet to be seen. And that's why I say we don't really know if he's dead or if he's simply just defeated for right now, because remember, Greg Rucka's starting all over again. again. So, I mean, we kind of have to ignore everything that Brian Azzarello did before and really just kind of pick up with what Greg Rucka is doing right now. Historically speaking, when it comes to the idea of Ares, he is intrinsically immortal. He cannot be destroyed. I mean, he cannot be killed. But it doesn't mean that Greg Rucka couldn't come back and say, actually, he can be killed, and here's how. You know, again, it's just one of those things that goes on in comics. Nothing's ever official. They can be changed all the time. And so from here, because of the fact that, you know, what's left of the Seer group is basically destroyed, you know, or I guess the group of Ares is destroyed by Wonder Woman. They're all essentially defeated, so on and so forth. Words, or I guess the role she's played in taking out this international terrorist group, basically reaches different newspapers and so on and so forth. And they all really just kind of laud her, you know, as Wonder Woman. That's what they refer to her as. Wonder Woman was not a name that Diana Prince gave herself. Wonder Woman was a name that was given to Diana Prince by everybody who looked around and said, this woman is a wonder, you know, that kind of cool thing. But with that being said, guys, I mean, this really kind of brings about the new origin of Wonder Woman in DC Rebirth. Again, I'm sorry if it's not the most exciting. I mean, doing this with a cold is very difficult to do. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but hopefully I'll feel better here in the next, you know, week or so, or a few days or whatever. And yeah, so with that being said, guys, if you're new here to Comics Explain, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.